CEO mocked his black maid for years. Turns out he loved her in secret all these years. For years, a powerful CEO humiliated his black maid in front of everyone, cutting jokes, cold stares, cruel words that left her silent and small. What he didn't know was that she wasn't a stranger. She was the woman he once loved, the woman he planned to marry, the woman he forgot after a tragic accident erased his memory. Every insult she endured hid a truth she carried alone. Every time she sang while cleaning, something inside him began to crack. Until one night, his past came rushing back, and so did the guilt. But some wounds don't heal just because memories return. When love is forgotten and dignity is broken, is remembering enough to save what was destroyed? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now, and if this story speaks to you, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The first hints of dawn had yet to break over Chicago's skyline as Elijah Grant's sleek black car pulled into his reserved parking spot at Grant Holdings. The 40-story glass and steel building stood like a frozen waterfall in the pre-morning darkness, its windows dark except for the security lights that created a faint golden glow. Elijah's polished dress shoes clicked against the marble floor of the lobby as he made his way to the executive elevator. His shoulders were tight with tension, and dark circles shadowed his eyes. Sleep had been elusive again. These days it usually was. The soft ping of the elevator announced his arrival on the top floor. As he walked toward his corner office, his phone buzzed incessantly with early morning emails. Each one added another layer of pressure about the upcoming board meeting. The acquisition deal had to go through. He wouldn't accept any other outcome. Opening his laptop, Elijah began scanning through the previous night's correspondence. The harsh blue light from his screen cut through the darkness of his office, casting sharp shadows across his face. His jaw clenched as he read through the concerns some board members had expressed about the aggressive takeover strategy. "Weak," he muttered, deleting another cautionary email. "They're all so afraid to take necessary action." The sound of a cleaning cart rolling past his office door broke his concentration. Through the glass walls, he could see Naomi Walker beginning her morning routine. She moved with quiet efficiency, her movements careful and precise as she went about her work. Something about her presence irritated him more than usual this morning. Maybe it was the way she seemed so at peace while his own mind was churning with strategies and counter-strategies. Or perhaps it was simply that she dared to exist in his line of sight when he wanted to be alone. Elijah pushed back from his desk and stepped into the hallway. "You know," he said, his voice cutting through the quiet morning air, "there's a reason cleaning staff usually work at night. Some people should really try to stay unseen." The words were cruel, and he knew it, but cruelty had become as natural as breathing to him these days. It was easier than feeling anything else. Naomi's hands stilled on her cart for just a moment, the briefest pause that most people wouldn't have even noticed. Then she continued her work, her movements just as measured and dignified as before. She didn't look up, didn't acknowledge his presence or his words. Her silence somehow made it worse. Elijah turned sharply and went back to his office, slamming the door harder than necessary. Outside, Naomi closed her eyes briefly. Her lips moved in a silent prayer, words she had repeated countless times over the past months. "Lord, give me strength. Help me remember why I'm here." She continued her cleaning routine, moving from office to office with quiet determination. The executive floor slowly came to life around her as early arriving employees began filtering in. They barely glanced her way. She had become part of the background, like the potted plants and abstract art on the walls. When she reached the main conference room, Naomi paused. The large space would soon be filled with board members and executives, all gathered to discuss millions of dollars worth of business decisions. But for now, it was empty and peaceful. She reached beneath her uniform and touched the ring that hung on a chain around her neck. The metal was warm from resting against her skin, and the familiar texture of it under her fingers brought both comfort and pain. "I'm still here," she whispered to the empty room. "I'm still waiting." The ring was her anchor, a reminder of promises made and a life that seemed like a distant dream now. It kept her going through moments like this morning, through all the small humiliations and dismissals. Each touch of the ring renewed her purpose, even as it squeezed her heart with remembered joy and present sorrow. Sunlight was beginning to stream through the floor-to-ceiling windows, painting golden stripes across the polished conference table. Soon the room would be filled with voices discussing profits and losses, mergers and acquisitions. But for now, in this quiet moment, Naomi allowed herself to remember why she stayed, why she endured. She straightened her shoulders and returned to her cart. There was still work to be done, and she would do it with the same grace and dignity she brought to everything. No matter how others treated her, she knew her own worth. And she knew, with a certainty that went bone deep, that she was exactly where she needed to be. The morning continued to unfold around her as she worked. More employees arrived, the elevators chimed with increasing frequency, and the quiet of dawn gave way to the subtle energy of a corporate workspace coming to life. Through it all, Naomi moved with purpose, carrying out her duties with careful attention, her prayers a constant whisper in her heart, and the ring a steady weight against her chest, a reminder of all that was lost and all that might still be found. From his office, Elijah watched as the sun rose fully over the Chicago skyline, casting long shadows through the glass walls. He tried to focus on his upcoming presentation, on the numbers and strategies that usually came so easily to him. But his thoughts kept drifting to the look on Naomi's face when he'd spoken to her, or rather, the careful absence of any look at all. Her composure in the face of his cruelty somehow made him feel smaller, though he would never admit it. He pushed the thought away, burying it under spreadsheets and profit projections. He had a board to convince and a deal to close. Everything else was just background noise. He told himself, just like the quiet woman who moved through the halls with her cleaning cart, carrying her dignity like a shield against his casual cruelty. The morning stretched on, each minute bringing the board meeting closer. Throughout the executive floor, tension built like a slowly tightening spring. But in the empty conference room, where Naomi had paused to touch her ring, a different kind of energy lingered, one of patience, of faith, and of love that endured beyond memory or understanding. The morning sun climbed higher over Chicago as executives filed into the conference room, their leather chairs squeaking softly as they settled in. The polished table reflected their serious expressions while they arranged laptops and papers before them. Elijah Grant stood at the head of the table, his presence commanding attention as he prepared to begin his presentation. Just as he opened his mouth to speak, the door opened quietly. Naomi Walker entered with her cleaning cart, having received instructions from facilities management to maintain the room during the meeting due to a later client presentation. She kept her movements careful and efficient, trying to minimize any disruption. Elijah's jaw tightened at the interruption. "Well, well," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the room. "I suppose we're privileged to have an audience for our meeting today." His lips curved in a mocking smile as he gestured toward Naomi. "Though I doubt our profit projections will be as interesting as whatever reality TV show you'd rather be watching." A ripple of uncomfortable laughter moved through the room. Several board members shifted in their seats, eyes darting away from the scene. Others forced polite smiles, more concerned with appeasing their CEO than considering the cruelty of his words. Naomi continued her work methodically, her movements precise and dignified. She wiped down the windows with smooth, even strokes, her back straight and her expression serene. The ring beneath her uniform pressed against her skin, a reminder of her purpose that helped her maintain her composure. "Perhaps we should ask for her expert business opinion?" Elijah continued, his voice sharp with sarcasm. "I'm sure her perspective from cleaning offices would be invaluable to our $10 billion expansion plan." More nervous laughter followed, though fainter this time. One older board member coughed and studied his papers intently. Another woman pretended to check her phone, her discomfort evident in her rigid posture. Through it all, Naomi worked steadily, moving from the windows to carefully dusting the wooden trim along the walls. Her silence spoke volumes, highlighting the pettiness of Elijah's remarks rather than diminishing her own dignity. Finally, seeming to tire of his target's lack of response, Elijah turned to his presentation. As he clicked through slides and discussed market projections, he found himself stumbling over words that usually came easily. A dull ache began to pulse behind his eyes, growing stronger as the meeting progressed. Naomi finished her tasks and quietly wheeled her cart toward the door. As she reached for the handle, Elijah called out once more, "Thank you for the entertainment. Do try not to trip over any billion-dollar decisions on your way out." She paused for just a moment, then left without a word or backward glance. The click of the door closing seemed to echo in the sudden silence. The rest of the meeting passed in a blur for Elijah. His head throbbed increasingly, and irritation crawled under his skin like ants. He couldn't seem to focus properly on the questions being asked, and his responses felt mechanical and distant. When the meeting finally ended, he retreated to his office, loosening his tie as he sank into his leather chair. The headache had intensified, feeling like a band of iron around his temples. He pressed his fingers against his eyes, trying to ease the pressure, but nothing helped. Hours passed. The sunshine faded into the purple-orange glow of sunset, then into the twinkling lights of the Chicago nightscape. Most employees had long since departed, leaving the office floors quiet and dark except for security lighting. Elijah remained at his desk, unable to shake the strange unease that had plagued him since the morning meeting. He stared at his computer screen without really seeing it, the mysterious tension headache still pulsing behind his eyes. Then, through the silence, came a sound that made him freeze. A soft voice carried through the empty halls, singing quietly. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. The simple melody floated through the air, clear and pure. Naomi's voice lifted gently on each note, filled with a peace that seemed to radiate through the words she sang. Elijah found himself standing, drawn to his office doorway. The singing continued, growing slightly louder as Naomi worked her way down the hall with her evening cleaning duties. I once was lost, but now am found, was blind, but now I see. Something about the song struck him like a physical blow. His head throbbed sharply, but underneath the pain was a sensation he couldn't name. Feeling of recognition so strong it made his hands shake. He stood frozen in the dark hallway, listening as Naomi's voice continued the hymn. Images flashed through his mind, too quick to grasp. Sunlight through stained glass, wooden pews, the smell of lemon polish. But they slipped away before he could hold on to them, leaving him shaken and confused. The singing grew fainter as Naomi moved to another section of the floor. Elijah remained motionless in the doorway, his breath uneven, as the final notes faded into silence. The familiar yet unfamiliar feeling of the hymn echoed in his mind, raising questions he couldn't answer and emotions he couldn't understand. Elijah tossed and turned in his king-sized bed, tangled in Egyptian cotton sheets that felt like restraints. His dreams came in bewildering flashes, flickering candles casting dancing shadows on walls, the sound of genuine laughter, his own, mixing with others, and a woman's voice singing softly, tenderly. The scenes shifted and blurred, leaving him reaching for memories that dissolved like morning mist. He jolted awake at 4:30 in the morning, his silk pajamas damp with sweat. The dream fragments clung to him, refusing to fade completely. Sitting on the edge of his bed, he pressed his palms against his eyes, trying to clear his head. "What is happening to me?" he muttered to the empty bedroom. Unable to face more disturbed sleep, he showered and dressed early, arriving at the office before sunrise. The cleaning crew was still working their way through the building, and the sound of vacuum cleaners echoed distantly. In his office, Elijah found himself unable to focus on his morning emails. His eyes kept drifting to old filing cabinets in the corner, though he couldn't say why. After reading the same proposal 3 times without absorbing a word, he pushed back from his desk with a growl of frustration. "Mr. Thompson, get in here!" he barked through the intercom. His assistant appeared seconds later, looking nervous. "Yes, sir. These quarterly projections are garbage. Redo them, all of them." Elijah thrust a stack of papers at the man. "But, sir, these were already approved last week. Are you questioning my judgment?" Elijah's voice turned dangerously quiet. "No, sir. Right away, sir." Thompson gathered the papers with trembling hands and fled. Throughout the morning, Elijah's agitation grew. He snapped at his secretary for bringing coffee that was too hot, berated the IT department over a minor network slowdown, and reduced a junior analyst to tears during a presentation. Between meetings, he found himself drawn to the old files, pulling out folders at random. Employee records from 5 years ago, acquisition paperwork, charity event documentation. Nothing seemed relevant, yet he couldn't stop searching, driven by an compulsion he didn't understand. From her cleaning cart in the hallway, Naomi observed his unusual behavior while pretending to organize her supplies. She noticed how he kept rubbing his temples, the way his movements seemed almost frantic. When their eyes met briefly through the glass wall of his office, she quickly looked away, but not before catching the flash of something almost like recognition in his gaze. As evening approached and the office emptied, Naomi began her usual cleaning routine in the executive suite. She had just started dusting Elijah's office when he spoke, making her jump slightly. "You've worked here how long?" His voice was clipped, attempting casualness but failing. Naomi paused, cloth in hand. 3 years, Mr. Grant." "Always on this floor?" "Yes, sir." He shuffled some papers on his desk, not looking at her. "Family in Chicago?" "My mother." Naomi kept her answers brief, careful. "Where did you—" He broke off suddenly, pressing his fingers to his forehead as pain lanced through his head. The headache that had been building all day peaked sharply. "Mr. Grant, are you all right? Get out!" he snapped, the pain making his voice harsh. "Just get out." Naomi gathered her cleaning supplies quickly but calmly, closing the door softly behind her. In the hallway, she leaned against her cart for a moment, taking a deep breath to steady herself. Later that night, Naomi sat at her mother Julia's kitchen table, warming her hands around a mug of chamomile tea. The small house smelled of fresh-baked cookies and lemon furniture polish, familiar comforts that usually soothed her spirit. But tonight, tension lined her shoulders. "He's different lately," Naomi said quietly. "Something's happening to him, Mama. I can see it." Julia studied her daughter's face carefully as she sat down across from her. "Different how?" "Confused, agitated, like he's searching for something but doesn't know what." Naomi traced the rim of her mug with one finger. "Today he actually spoke to me. Asked about my background. He's never done that before." Julia's hum was non-committal but thoughtful. "And how are you holding up with all this?" Naomi's shoulders slumped slightly. "I'm tired, Mama. So tired of carrying this weight. Sometimes I think it would be easier to just quit, find another job, forget everything that happened. Easier, yes, Julia agreed softly. But would it bring peace to your heart? No, Naomi whispered. Julia reached across the table to cover her daughter's hand with her own. Your silence has protected you all this time, child. But don't let it become a prison. Sometimes our silence can wound not just ourselves, but others who need to hear the truth. What if the truth makes things worse? Truth spoken in love, in God's timing, can never truly make things worse. Julia squeezed her hand. But you need wisdom to know when and how to speak it. Keep praying for guidance. The Lord knows your heart and his. Later, in her own small apartment, Naomi knelt beside her bed. The moon cast silver light through her window, making the simple gold ring on her bedside table gleam. Lord, she prayed softly, give me strength for whatever comes next. Help me know when to be silent and when to speak. And please. She hesitated, then continued in a whisper. Please help him find his way back to the truth, to himself, to you. She remained there for a long time, letting peace gradually replace her uncertainty as she poured out her heart in quiet prayer, asking for clarity in the complicated path ahead. The late evening sun cast long shadows through the glass walls of Grant Holdings, painting orange stripes across the empty hallways. Most employees had left hours ago, leaving behind the familiar quiet that settled over the building after dark. Naomi methodically worked her way through her cleaning routine, the soft swish of her cloth against glass providing a steady rhythm to her thoughts. 2 days had passed since her conversation with her mother, and the tension in the office had only grown thicker. Elijah's behavior had become increasingly erratic, though he'd barely acknowledged her presence since their brief exchange in his office. From her position near the conference room, she heard a crash from the direction of Elijah's office. She paused, cloth suspended mid-wipe, listening intently. Another sound followed, something between a groan and a gasp. Naomi set down her cleaning supplies and moved quickly toward his office. Through the glass walls, she saw Elijah standing behind his desk, one hand gripping the edge so tightly his knuckles had turned white. His other hand pressed against his temple, his face contorted in pain. "Mr. Grant," she called out, pushing open the door. "Are you all right?" He looked up at her, his eyes unfocused and glassy. "I can't," he started to say, then stumbled forward. "The lights! They're too—" Naomi rushed forward just as his knees buckled. She managed to catch his arm as he collapsed, helping to break his fall as he crumpled to the floor in the hallway. His body went limp, head lolling to one side. "Mr. Grant." She knelt beside him, heart pounding. "Can you hear me?" His eyes fluttered, and a low moan escaped his lips. Keeping one hand on his shoulder, Naomi pulled her phone from her pocket with the other, quickly dialing 911. "I need an ambulance at Grant Holdings." She spoke clearly into the phone, providing the address and floor number. "A man is unconscious. Yes, he's breathing, but he collapsed after complaining of head pain." While she spoke with the dispatcher, Elijah stirred slightly. His eyes opened part way, unfocused and confused. "Don't," he whispered, his hand reaching out blindly. "Please, Naomi, don't leave." Her heart stuttered at hearing him say her name, not cleaning lady or "you there," but her actual name. She caught his searching hand in hers. "I'm right here," she assured him softly. "Help is coming. Just stay still." His fingers tightened around hers as another wave of pain crossed his face. "Everything's spinning," he muttered, then slipped back into unconsciousness. The minutes until the paramedics arrived felt endless. Naomi maintained her composure, monitoring his breathing, keeping her hand firmly in his. When the elevator finally dinged and emergency personnel rushed out, she quickly explained what had happened. Has he been experiencing headaches? Any recent trauma? One paramedic asked as they checked his vital signs. He's been having severe headaches, Naomi confirmed. And he had a car accident several years ago, head injury with memory loss. They efficiently transferred Elijah onto a stretcher. As they started to move him towards the elevator, his hand reached out again, searching. Naomi, I'll come with you, she said without hesitation, falling into step beside the stretcher. In the elevator, under the harsh fluorescent lights, she noticed how pale he looked, how the lines of tension hadn't fully left his face even in unconsciousness. The ambulance ride was a blur of sirens and medical terminology. Naomi sat quietly in the corner, answering questions when asked about his medical history, watching as the paramedics monitored his condition. Elijah drifted in and out of consciousness, each time seeking her out with increasingly distressed movements until he found her still there. At the hospital, they wheeled him straight into the emergency room. Naomi followed as far as she was allowed, then found herself alone in the waiting room. The adrenaline that had carried her through the crisis began to fade, leaving her shaky and drained. She sank into an uncomfortable plastic chair and closed her eyes, offering a silent prayer. Hours passed, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and the smell of antiseptic filled her nose. Occasionally, nurses would update her on his condition, stable, undergoing tests, resting. Finally, as the sky outside began to lighten with pre-dawn grey, a doctor approached her. "Are you family?" he asked, consulting his clipboard. "No, I'm—" She hesitated, unsure how to explain. "I work for him. I was there when he collapsed." The doctor nodded. "Mr. Grant is stable now. The tests show no immediate physical danger, but there are some concerning patterns we're seeing. The severe headaches, combined with his history of trauma and memory loss, suggest his brain may be trying to process unresolved memories." What does that mean? Sometimes when the brain has blocked out traumatic memories, they can start to resurface under extreme stress. It can cause physical symptoms, migraines, disorientation, even blackouts. We're recommending he stay for observation and consultation with a neurologist. Naomi absorbed this information, her heart heavy with understanding. "Can I see him?" The doctor led her to a private room. Elijah lay in the hospital bed, looking unusually vulnerable in the pale blue hospital gown. The monitors beeped steadily, and the first rays of dawn filtered through the window, softening his features. For the first time since, she'd known him. His face was completely unguarded, peaceful despite the hint of troubled dreams that occasionally flickered across his expression. Naomi stood by his bedside for a moment, watching him sleep. Her own exhaustion pressed heavily on her shoulders, and she knew she needed to leave soon to prepare for another work day. But she allowed herself this brief moment, remembering how desperately he had called her name, how tightly he had held onto her hand. With gentle movements, she adjusted his blanket, making sure he was warm enough. Then, gathering her strength, she turned to leave, knowing that when he woke, the walls would likely be back in place, the moment of vulnerability forgotten or denied. At the door, she paused for one last look. The rising sun painted gold across his sleeping form, and for just a second, she caught a glimpse of the man she had once known, the man who might still exist somewhere beneath the layers of pain and forgotten memories. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Grant Holdings when Elijah stormed through the lobby, ignoring the startled looks from employees. His suit was slightly rumpled, his tie loosened, unusual details for a man known for his immaculate appearance. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and a muscle twitched in his jaw as he jabbed the elevator button repeatedly. The doctor's warnings echoed in his mind. "Mr. Grant, you need rest. These symptoms could indicate serious underlying issues." But he had dismissed them, signing himself out against medical advice. He couldn't stay in that hospital bed with fragments of dreams and half-memories haunting him. In his office, he paced like a caged animal, running his hands through his usually perfectly styled hair. The headache lingered at the edges of his consciousness, threatening to return. He kept seeing flashes, a warm smile, the sound of laughter, the smell of vanilla that made no sense but wouldn't leave him alone. Finally, he pressed the intercom button. "Send Naomi Walker to my office, immediately." While he waited, he stood at the window, hands clasped behind his back, trying to project the control he didn't feel. When the door opened softly, he didn't turn around. "You wanted to see me, Mr. Grant?" Her voice. Something about her voice made his head pound and his chest ache. He spun around, his expression hard. "Why do I know your voice?" The words came out harsh, accusatory. "Last night when I was—" He paused, hating to acknowledge his weakness. "Unwell, I called for you. By name. Why?" Naomi stood just inside the doorway, her hands clasped in front of her uniform. She looked tired, he noticed, then pushed the observation away. Her face showed a complex mix of emotions, fear, determination, and something deeper he couldn't name. "Please sit down," she said quietly. "I prefer to stand." He snapped, "Answer the question." Naomi took a deep breath, and he saw her right hand move to touch something beneath her collar. "You know my voice because you used to listen to me sing every Sunday in church. You know my name because you used to whisper it every night before we fell asleep. You called for me because somewhere, deep down, your heart remembers what your mind forgot." The room seemed to tilt. Elijah gripped the edge of his desk. "What are you talking about?" With trembling fingers, Naomi pulled a chain from beneath her uniform. On it hung a ring, a delicate vintage piece with a small diamond surrounded by sapphires. "You gave me this ring 5 years ago, when you asked me to be your wife." Elijah stared at the ring, feeling like he couldn't breathe. Images flashed through his mind. Candlelight, a park bench, snow falling softly, but they slipped away before he could grasp them. "You're lying," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "This is some kind of manipulation. We met at my mother's church," Naomi continued, her voice growing stronger. "You came every Sunday for 3 months before you finally asked me to dinner. We dated for 2 years. You proposed on Christmas Eve in Lincoln Park, right by the zoo lights. You said you couldn't wait another day to make me your wife." "Stop it!" Elijah shouted, pressing his hands to his temples. The headache was building again, bringing with it flashes of memory that felt like knife cuts, the smell of coffee and fresh bread, the sound of gospel music, warm brown eyes filled with love. Then the accident happened. Naomi's voice cracked slightly. "You were in a coma for 2 weeks. When you woke up, you didn't remember me. The doctors said the trauma had caused selective memory loss. Your family—" She paused, swallowing hard. "They thought it would be better not to force the memories. They said it might cause more damage." "No," Elijah whispered, but the denial felt hollow. "I would remember." "Would you?" Naomi asked gently. "You've spent 5 years building walls around yourself, Mr. Grant. You turned yourself into someone else entirely. Someone cold and cruel, someone who would never have set foot in a small church on the South Side, someone who would never have fallen in love with a pastor's daughter." Elijah's legs wouldn't hold him anymore. He sank into his chair, his whole body shaking. "Why are you here? Why did you take this job?" "Because I promised to love you, in sickness and in health." Naomi's voice was barely above a whisper now. "Because I needed to know you were okay, even if you never remembered me. Because some part of me hoped that maybe, someday—" "Get out!" Elijah cut her off, his voice raw. When she didn't move immediately, he slammed his hand on the desk. "Get out!" Naomi unclasped the chain from her neck with shaking fingers and placed it gently on his desk. Without another word, she turned and left the office, closing the door softly behind her. Elijah sat motionless, staring at the ring. More memories were coming now, unstoppable, the taste of Julia's Sunday dinners, the sound of Naomi's laugh echoing in a small apartment, the feel of her hand in his as they walked through the park. Each memory brought with it a wave of shame as he remembered his cruelty over the past months, every dismissive word, every mocking comment. His vision blurred, and he realized he was crying. He picked up the ring, and it felt familiar in his hands. The inscription inside caught his eye. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. And there, alone in his office with the setting sun painting the sky in shades of red and gold, Elijah Grant finally broke down completely, holding the physical proof that the woman he had treated with such contempt was the same woman he had once loved enough to marry. The drive home felt surreal to Elijah, like moving through a dream. His hands trembled on the steering wheel as fragments of memories continued to surface, soft touches, shared laughter, tender moments that now felt like shards of glass cutting into his consciousness. The setting sun cast long shadows across the city streets, matching his darkening mood. Inside his penthouse apartment, he stood in the center of his immaculate living room, feeling suddenly like a stranger in his own space. Where were the traces of his past life, of the man he used to be, the man who had loved Naomi Walker? The storage room. He whispered to himself, remembering the boxes he'd never unpacked after moving here post-accident. His family had handled everything during his recovery, storing away his old life while he built this new, colder version of himself. The storage room was tucked away in a corner of his apartment, its door usually ignored. Tonight, it creaked open to reveal stacks of carefully labeled boxes. His hands shook as he pulled down the first one marked Personal Pre-Accident. Inside, he found photo albums he didn't remember keeping. The first page he opened showed him at a church picnic, his arm around Naomi's shoulders. They both beamed at the camera, looking impossibly young and happy. In the photo he wore jeans and a casual shirt, so different from his current wardrobe of designer suits. Naomi's face glowed with joy, her eyes fixed on him with such love it made his chest ache. "Oh God," he breathed, sinking to the floor as more photos spilled out. There they were at the beach, at family dinners, at what looked like Julia's house. In every image, he saw a version of himself he barely recognized, open, loving, genuine. His laptop lay forgotten on the coffee table, but now he remembered something else. With unsteady fingers, he logged into his cloud storage, scrolling through folders he'd never opened. There, in a folder dated 5 years ago, he found hundreds more photos and documents, love letters. He'd written her love letters. "My dearest Naomi," one began. "Today in church, watching you sing, I thanked God again for bringing you into my life. Your voice isn't just beautiful. It reminds me that there's something bigger than quarterly reports and profit margins. You make me want to be better, to be worthy of the love you so freely give." Tears blurred his vision as he opened another file, their wedding plans. The date had been set for June 15th. They'd chosen a small church venue, planned a gospel choir, selected readings about love and faith. His fingers traced the screen where they'd listed their vows. Vows he'd never gotten to speak. Across town, Naomi's hands shook as she turned her key in her mother's front door. Julia looked up from her Bible study at the kitchen table, immediately noting her daughter's pale face and red-rimmed eyes. "Oh, baby," Julia said softly, opening her arms. "Come here." Naomi collapsed into her mother's embrace, finally letting out the sobs she'd held back all day. "I told him, Mama. I told him everything." Julia stroked her daughter's hair, rocking her gently as she had when Naomi was small. "Tell me what happened." Through her tears, Naomi recounted the confrontation in Elijah's office, his anger, his confusion, the moment she'd shown him the ring. "I left it with him," she whispered. I couldn't carry it anymore." Julia guided her daughter to the couch, keeping one arm around her shoulders. "You did what needed to be done," she said firmly. "The truth had to come out. But what if I've made everything worse?" Naomi wiped her eyes. "You should have seen his face, Mama. He looked so lost, so angry." "Truth often hurts before it heals," Julia said, reaching for her well-worn Bible. "We need to pray about this, baby. Guard your heart, but don't close it completely. Sometimes God uses our pain to create pathways for healing." They bowed their heads together, Julia's strong, steady voice lifting up both their hearts. "Lord, we come before you tonight with heavy hearts. We ask for your wisdom and protection. Guide Elijah through these recovered memories. Help Naomi find strength in you. Let truth do its work in your time, not ours." After the prayer, Julia made them both tea, adding honey the way she always had when Naomi was upset. "Remember what we talked about before. Silence can wound the soul, but so can rushing ahead of God's timing. Give him space to process this revelation." Back in his apartment, Elijah had moved to his home office, surrounded by photos and documents spread across his desk. His fingers shook as he typed an email to his therapist, Dr. Sharon Chen. "Need emergency appointment tomorrow morning. Recovering memories from pre-accident period. Significant emotional distress. Please respond ASAP." The reply came within minutes. 8 a.m. tomorrow. Come straight to my office." He set down his phone and picked up another photo. This one showed him and Naomi at what must have been their engagement party. Her head rested on his shoulder, his lips pressed to her temple. They looked so peaceful, so certain of their future together. The living room grew darker as night fell, but Elijah didn't move to turn on any lights. He sat in his leather armchair, holding the engagement photo, letting the shadows gather around him. His thumb traced Naomi's face in the picture. "Naomi," he whispered, his voice rough with regret. "What did I become? What did I do to us?" The silence of his expensive apartment offered no answers. Outside, Chicago's lights twinkled like stars, while inside, a man sat alone in the dark, facing the ruins of a love he'd forgotten and the weight of cruelty he could never take back. "Naomi," he whispered again, the name both a prayer and a lament. In the photograph, her smile remained frozen in time, a reminder of everything he'd lost and everything he'd destroyed. The morning sun hadn't yet cleared Chicago's skyline when Elijah Grant pulled into the parking lot of Dr. Chen's office building. His hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white. The engagement ring he'd kept from yesterday sat heavy in his coat pocket, a physical reminder of all he couldn't remember. Inside the office, soft instrumental music played as Dr. Chen welcomed him with professional warmth. "Good morning, Elijah. You said this was urgent?" He sank into the familiar leather chair, exhaustion etched on his face. "I've been having headaches, flashbacks, and yesterday..." He pulled out the ring, letting it catch the light. "I learned that before my accident, I was engaged to be married." Dr. Chen's expression remained calm, though her eyes sharpened with interest. "Tell me about these flashbacks. They're not clear pictures, more like feelings. A song that felt familiar, a voice that made my head hurt." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "The woman I was going to marry, she's been working as a cleaner in my building. I've been horrible to her, and I didn't even know who she was." The brain's response to trauma can be complex. Dr. Chen began, her voice gentle but firm. "Sometimes, when an experience is too painful, our minds protect us by suppressing memories. But those memories don't disappear. They often influence our behavior in ways we don't understand." She pulled out a notepad. Let's talk about the accident itself. What do you remember? Elijah closed his eyes. Rain. It was raining. The roads were slick. His breathing quickened. I was angry about something. Driving too fast. Stay with that moment. Dr. Chen encouraged. You're safe here. Images flashed behind his closed eyelids. Headlights coming towards me. I swerved. There was a guardrail. His hand went to his chest where old scars lay hidden. Then nothing but hospital lights and Marcus telling me about the company. Marcus Hale, your business partner. Dr. Chen made a note. Tell me about his role in your recovery. Elijah's brow furrowed. He was there every day, handling the business, updating me on meetings. He said I needed to focus on getting stronger, becoming the leader the company needed. And what about your personal life? Did he mention Naomi? The question hit like a physical blow. No, Elijah whispered. He must have known. He was at our engagement party. I found photos last night. Dr. Chen leaned forward slightly. Elijah, sometimes people take advantage of others' vulnerability during recovery. They may shape the narrative to serve their own interests. The implication hung heavy in the air. Elijah remembered Marcus's smooth voice. Focus on what matters. The business. Everything else is a distraction. I became exactly what he wanted. Elijah said, his voice hollow. Cold. Focused only on profit. The perfect business partner. They spent the next hour working through breathing exercises and grounding techniques for when memories surfaced. Dr. Chen explained how trauma could reshape personality, emphasizing that healing would take time and patience. Your mind is protecting itself, she explained. As you feel safer, more memories may return, but don't force them. And Elijah? She fixed him with a steady gaze. Be very careful about who you trust during this process. The morning sun had fully risen by the time Elijah reached his office. He waited until he saw Naomi's familiar figure in the hallway, her head down as she pushed her cleaning cart. Naomi, he called softly, nothing like his usual commanding tone. Could we talk? She turned, her face carefully neutral. Mr. Grant, please, Elijah. His voice cracked slightly. Just Elijah. They stepped into an empty conference room. Naomi stood near the door, maintaining physical distance. The morning light caught the cross she wore, making it gleam. I saw Dr. Chen this morning, he began, his usual confidence nowhere in sight. She's helping me understand why I couldn't remember, why I became... He gestured helplessly. This person I am now. Naomi's hands clasped together, but she remained silent. I know I have no right to ask anything of you. He continued, but I need to understand what I destroyed. Would you consider staying? Just long enough for me to... He trailed off, unable to find the right words. Naomi took a deep breath. I'll stay through the month, she said finally. But I need boundaries. I'm not that girl from the photos anymore, Elijah. And you're not that man. I understand. He wanted to step closer but held himself back. Thank you. She nodded once and left the room, her cart squeaking softly down the hall. Elijah watched her go, feeling the weight of years of casual cruelty between them. That evening, in his home office, Elijah pulled out a sheet of heavy stationery. His pen hovered over the blank page before he began to write. Dear Naomi, I don't deserve your forgiveness. I'm not even sure I deserve the chance to apologize, but I need to try to put into words how deeply I regret. He wrote until his hand cramped, pouring out his shame, his confusion, his desperate wish to understand. When he finished, he folded the pages carefully but didn't seal them. He wasn't ready yet. There was too much still to remember, too much to understand. The letter went into his desk drawer, along with the ring. Outside his window, Chicago's lights began to twinkle on, one by one, like stars being born in the growing darkness. The morning sun painted long shadows across the executive floor as Elijah watched Naomi methodically clean the windows. Her movements were precise, practiced, the same routine he'd ignored or mocked countless times before. Now, each sweep of her cloth felt like an indictment. "You used to love morning light," he said softly, the memory surfacing like a bubble breaking the water's surface. "You said it made everything feel new." Naomi's hand paused mid-motion. "Yes," she replied, not turning around. "I still do. Would you tell me more?" His voice was hesitant, so different from his usual commanding tone. "About us. About what happened after—" She finished the window before facing him, maintaining careful distance. "Are you sure you want to know?" "Please." They sat in the small break room, empty this early. Naomi's hands wrapped around a paper cup of tea, her eyes focused on the rising steam. "I wrote to you every week for 6 months." She began quietly. "Called every day at first, until they stopped putting my calls through. Your secretary said you were focusing on recovery, that all personal matters had to wait." Elijah's fingers dug into his palms. "I never saw any letters." "I know that now." Her voice held old pain, weathered smooth like sea glass. "But then? I thought you'd decided I wasn't worth remembering, that maybe the accident had given you an excuse to erase the cleaning lady you'd fallen for." "Naomi, no." She held up a hand, stopping him. "Let me finish, please." He nodded, forcing himself to stay silent. "I kept working here because I needed the job, but also because I couldn't believe you'd really forgotten everything. I thought if you just saw me enough—" She gave a small, sad laugh. "Instead, you looked right through me. Worse, you started treating me like I was nothing, less than nothing." Tears burned behind his eyes. "How did you bear it?" "Faith," she said simply. "Prayer. My mama's strength. And eventually I accepted that the man I loved was gone. The Elijah who proposed to me in his grandmother's garden, who promised to stand beside me no matter what. He didn't exist anymore." Each word felt like a knife. Elijah pressed his hands flat against the table to stop their shaking. "I want to know everything. Please, tell me about us, about who I was." Over the next 2 days, they met in quiet moments between meetings and calls. In the break room, empty conference rooms, even the quiet corner of the parking garage. Each conversation filled in another piece of the puzzle he'd lost. She told him about their first meeting, him spilling coffee on himself and her helping clean it up, both laughing at his clumsiness. Their first date at a small jazz club where they danced until closing. How he'd defended her to his board members when they made subtle racist comments, refusing to back down. "You were different then," she said softly during one conversation. "Ambitious, yes, but kind. You cared about people, not just profits." The memories came in fragments, her smile in candlelight, the sound of her laugh, the feel of her hand in his. Each one brought fresh waves of shame at how far he'd fallen. During his evening therapy session, Dr. Chen guided him through another memory exercise. "Focus on the emotions first," she instructed. "Let the images follow." Elijah closed his eyes, breathing deeply. "I feel nervous, excited. There are flowers everywhere." The memory crashed over him like a wave. His grandmother's garden, roses in full bloom. Naomi in a yellow sundress, her eyes wide as he dropped to one knee. The ring catching the last rays of sunset as he held it up. "I know people will try to stand between us," he heard himself say, voice thick with emotion. "I know they'll say we're wrong for each other. But I promise you, Naomi Walker, I will always stand beside you. I will shield you from their hatred and prove every day that love is stronger than prejudice." Her tears falling as she whispered, "Yes," over and over, pulling him up to kiss him. In Dr. Chen's office, Elijah broke. Great, heaving sobs tore from his chest as years of suppressed emotion finally broke free. He wept for the man he'd been, for the love he'd forgotten, for every cruel word he'd spoken to the woman he'd once promised to protect. "I became everything I promised to fight against," he choked out. "I didn't just forget her, I became her tormentor." Dr. Chen handed him tissues, her expression compassionate but firm. "You can't change the past, Elijah, but you can choose what to do now." He wiped his eyes, straightening slowly. "I know what I have to do. It's not enough to apologize privately. I need to make this right publicly. Everyone in this company has watched me humiliate her for years. They need to see the truth." "Are you sure you're ready for that?" Elijah nodded, his jaw set with familiar determination, but his eyes holding new humility. "It's not about what I'm ready for. It's about what's right, what's just." He stood, his decision made. The man who had hidden from emotion for so long was gone. In his place stood someone new, or perhaps someone very old, finally remembered. Dawn broke over Chicago's skyline as employees began filtering into Grant Holdings headquarters. The usual morning bustle felt different, tense, expectant. An all-staff meeting had been announced just an hour earlier, marked as mandatory. Such gatherings were rare enough to cause speculation. Elijah Grant stood at his office window, watching the sun climb higher between glass towers. His hand trembled slightly as he adjusted his tie. The weight of what he was about to do pressed heavily on his shoulders. The conference room, the largest in the building, filled quickly. Executives in tailored suits claimed the front rows, while middle management and support staff filled in behind. Naomi Walker slipped in quietly, taking a place near the back wall. She wore her cleaning uniform with the same dignity she always had, though her hands were clasped tightly together. At precisely 9 o'clock, Elijah entered. The usual shuffle of papers and whispered conversations died immediately. He walked to the front, but didn't sit. Instead, he gripped the podium with both hands, scanning the faces before him. Many avoided his gaze. They'd learned to over the years. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "What I'm about to say will surprise many of you. It may make some uncomfortable, but it needs to be said." He took a deep breath. "For years, I have led this company with what I thought was strength. I believed that success justified any behavior, that power meant never having to apologize. I was wrong, deeply, fundamentally wrong." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Several board members exchanged glances. "Many of you have witnessed my treatment of our cleaning staff, particularly Naomi Walker." His eyes found her in the crowd. "You've heard my jokes, seen my dismissive behavior, watched as I used my position to humiliate someone I deemed beneath me." The room grew so quiet you could hear the ventilation system humming. Some employees looked down, remembering their own nervous laughter at his cruel remarks. What none of you knew, what I myself had forgotten due to trauma from a car accident, was that 5 years ago, Naomi Walker was not just an employee. She was my fiancée. Gasps filled the room. Heads turned toward Naomi, who stood straight-backed, her expression composed despite the tears shining in her eyes. The accident took my memories of her, of us. But that's no excuse for what followed. In losing those memories, I became someone else. Someone who embodied the very prejudices and cruelty I once fought against. I used my position to inflict pain on the woman I had once promised to protect. His voice cracked slightly. Several people were openly crying now, including some of the executives who had enabled his behavior for years. My actions weren't just personal failings. They represented a systemic racism that often goes unchallenged in corporate environments. When I mocked Naomi, many of you laughed. Not because you found it funny, but because I had the power to make your lives difficult if you didn't. That stops today. He stepped away from the podium, turning to face Naomi directly. Naomi Walker, I stand here before our entire company to say I am deeply, profoundly sorry. Sorry for every dismissive word, every cruel joke, every moment I made you feel less than the extraordinary person you are. You showed more character by maintaining your dignity in the face of my cruelty than I have shown in all my years as CEO. Tears rolled freely down Naomi's cheeks now, but she didn't look away. Around her, several colleagues reached out to touch her shoulders in support. I know an apology isn't enough. Actions matter more than words. Starting today, I'm implementing new anti-discrimination policies with real consequences. I'm establishing a review board for workplace conduct that will have the power to override even my decisions. And I'm creating a scholarship fund in Naomi's name for minority students pursuing business degrees. The room burst into applause, but Elijah held up his hand. Please, I'm not finished. The room quieted again. Naomi. His voice softened, vulnerable in a way none of his employees had ever heard. I know I have no right to ask anything of you. The man you loved, the man I was, would be ashamed of who I became. But if you're willing, I'd like the chance to rebuild what was lost. Not to erase these years or pretend they didn't happen, but to prove that change is possible. That love can be stronger than prejudice, just like I once promised you. The silence that followed felt electric. Every person in the room held their breath, watching this moment of raw humanity unfold between their powerful CEO and the woman he had wronged. Naomi finally spoke, her voice quiet but clear. You're right. You can't erase these years. They happened. They hurt. She paused, drawing a steady breath. I need time, Elijah. Time to think, to pray, to be sure of my own heart. Elijah nodded, acceptance and hope warring in his expression. I understand. Take all the time you need. I'll be here. The meeting ended shortly after, but its impact lingered in the air like thunder after lightning. As people filed out, many stopped to speak to Naomi, offering apologies of their own, expressing admiration for her strength. A few of the board members looked distinctly uncomfortable, perhaps recognizing their own complicity in years of silence. Elijah watched it all from the front of the room, his heart lighter despite the uncertainty ahead. For the first time in years, he felt fully present in his own skin, seen, known, and accountable. Whether or not Naomi could forgive him, he knew this was the first step toward becoming the man he should have been all along. When nearly everyone had gone, Naomi paused at the door. She turned back for a moment, meeting his gaze. Something flickered in her eyes. Not quite forgiveness, but perhaps its distant cousin. Possibility. Then she was gone, leaving Elijah standing alone with his fragile hope. The evening sun cast long shadows through Julia Walker's kitchen window as she set 2 steaming mugs of chamomile tea on the worn wooden table. Naomi sat across from her mother, her hands wrapped tightly around the warm ceramic, seeking comfort in its familiar heat. He apologized in front of everyone, Mama. Naomi said softly, her voice trembling slightly. Not just to me, but for everything. The racism, the abuse of power, all of it. Julia listened intently, her wise eyes studying her daughter's face. Steam curled up from her untouched tea as she waited for Naomi to continue. He wants to try again, to rebuild what we had. Naomi's fingers traced the rim of her mug. Part of me wants to believe it's possible, that God brought back his memories for a reason. Julia reached across the table, covering her daughter's restless hand with her own. Baby, God does everything for a reason, but sometimes that reason isn't what we expect it to be. What do you mean? Naomi looked up, meeting her mother's steady gaze. There's a difference between forgiveness and reconciliation, Julia said carefully. Forgiveness is something you give freely, for your own soul's healing. Reconciliation, that requires both parties to do the work. It needs truth, repentance, and time. Naomi's eyes filled with tears. But he is repenting, Mama. You should have seen him today. He was broken, real. I believe you. Julia nodded, squeezing her daughter's hand. And I'm glad his heart is changing. But baby, 5 years of pain doesn't heal in one day, no matter how sincere the apology. The kitchen fell quiet, except for the gentle ticking of the old clock on the wall. Outside, a car passed slowly down their street, its headlights briefly illuminating the family photos hanging in careful rows. I still love him, Naomi whispered, her voice catching. The man he was before, and maybe even glimpses of who he's becoming now. But every time I close my eyes, I see the way he looked at me all these years, like I was nothing. Julia's heart ached for her daughter. She got up and moved around the table, wrapping her arms around Naomi's shoulders. That pain is real, baby. It's valid. And rushing back into a relationship before you've healed from it wouldn't be fair to either of you. Naomi leaned into her mother's embrace, letting the tears fall freely now. How do I tell him? He's so hopeful. Tell him the truth, Julia said simply. The same way he finally told his truth today. If his repentance is genuine, he'll understand that it comes without guarantees. They sat together as the kitchen grew darker, mother and daughter drawing strength from each other as they had so many times before. Julia's quiet prayers mixed with Naomi's tears until both ran dry, leaving behind a clarity that felt both painful and necessary. The next morning dawned cool and clear. Naomi arrived at Grant Holdings earlier than usual, knowing Elijah would already be in his office. Her heart pounded as she rode the elevator to the executive floor, but her resolve remained steady. She found him standing at his window, watching the city wake up below. He turned at the sound of her footsteps, hope lighting his features before he caught the expression on her face. Naomi, he said softly, taking a step toward her before stopping himself. We need to talk, Elijah. Her voice was gentle but firm. He nodded, gesturing to the chairs by his desk. They sat down, the morning sun casting long shadows between them. Your apology yesterday meant everything, Naomi began, meeting his gaze directly. I believe your remorse is real. I believe you want to change, that you are changing. But I can't be with you. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Pain flashed across his face, but he didn't interrupt. Remembering our love doesn't erase the years of harm. She continued, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to fall. Those memories might help explain why you acted as you did, but they don't heal the wounds your actions created. I spent 5 years being treated like I was less than human by the man who once promised to love me forever. That kind of pain doesn't just disappear because you remember making that promise. Elijah's hands gripped the arms of his chair, his knuckles white, but his voice was soft when he spoke. I understand. Do you? Naomi asked, not unkindly. Because this isn't just about us, Elijah. It's about power and race, and the way privilege can blind us to the humanity of others. Your memory loss might explain your actions, but it doesn't excuse them. He nodded slowly, tears gathering in his eyes. You're right, about all of it. I don't deserve your forgiveness, let alone a second chance. This isn't about what you deserve, Naomi said. It's about what I need. And right now I need time and space to heal, to figure out who I am after carrying this weight for so long. Of course. He whispered, "Whatever you need." Naomi stood, smoothing her uniform with trembling hands. "Keep doing the work, Elijah. Not for me, but because it's right. Show that yesterday wasn't just a moment of emotion, but the beginning of real change." He rose as well, maintaining the distance between them. "I will. I promise." She turned to leave, pausing at the door. "Thank you for not fighting this. I've done enough damage trying to control things." He said quietly, "I won't add to your pain by demanding more than you can give." Naomi nodded once, then walked away. Her steps were steady as she made her way through the building and out into the morning sunshine. Behind her, through the towering glass windows, she knew Elijah was watching. She could feel the weight of his gaze, heavy with understanding and regret. She didn't look back. Sometimes she realized the bravest thing wasn't staying or fighting. It was walking away until your heart was truly ready for whatever came next. The seasons changed slowly in Chicago, like watercolors bleeding into one another. Summer faded into autumn, bringing with it cool breezes and leaves that scattered across the sidewalks outside Grant Holdings. Inside the building, changes were happening just as steadily, if less visibly. 2 weeks after his public apology, Elijah called an emergency board meeting. The executives shifted uncomfortably in their chairs as he stood at the head of the conference table, his face set with determination. "I'm stepping down as Chief Executive Officer," he announced without preamble. The room erupted in murmurs, but he raised a hand for silence. "This isn't up for debate. I've already prepared the necessary documentation." One of the board members, Richard Chen, leaned forward. "Elijah, this seems rather extreme. Your recent situation doesn't require such drastic measures." "My recent situation, as you call it," Elijah replied firmly, "is exactly why this is necessary. I've demonstrated poor judgment and allowed personal trauma to influence my leadership in ways that harmed others. The company deserves better." He laid out his plan methodically. He would retain a 30% stake in the company, but transfer executive control to a board-appointed CEO. The transition would take place over 3 months to ensure stability. While the board processed this news, Elijah was already implementing other changes. He established an anonymous fund through his personal accounts to support diversity initiatives within the company. New hiring practices were put in place, and mandatory sensitivity training was scheduled for all management levels. Meanwhile, Naomi submitted her resignation. Her supervisor, remembering Elijah's public confession, tried to convince her to stay, even offering a promotion. But Naomi knew it was time to move on. "I need a fresh start," she explained to Julia over coffee one Sunday afternoon. They sat in Julia's small but warm kitchen, sunlight streaming through lace curtains onto the worn wooden table. Julia nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Sometimes God closes one door to open another. Have you thought about what's next?" Naomi wrapped her hands around her coffee mug, drawing comfort from its warmth. "Actually, yes. Remember that non-profit organization your church partners with, the one helping women transition from homelessness to stable housing?" "New Horizons?" Julia's face brightened. "They're always looking for dedicated people." Within 2 weeks, Naomi had secured a position as a program coordinator at New Horizons. The work was challenging but fulfilling, allowing her to use her organizational skills while making a real difference in people's lives. The autumn winds grew colder as October turned to November. Elijah, true to his word, began volunteering at local homeless shelters. He arrived early on Saturday mornings, wearing simple clothes and using only his first name. He served meals, cleaned facilities, and listened to stories from people society had forgotten. "You're new here," an elderly woman named May observed one morning as he refilled her coffee cup. "Yes, Mom," he replied quietly. She studied him with wise eyes. "You're carrying something heavy, aren't you? We all are here." Elijah paused, then nodded. "I'm trying to learn how to put it down." "Good answer," May said, patting his hand. "That's the only way forward." As winter approached, the changes at Grant Holdings became more visible. The new CEO, Sarah Martinez, brought fresh energy and perspective to the company. The diversity initiatives Elijah had funded began showing results, with more inclusive hiring practices and a noticeably changed corporate culture. Elijah continued his therapy sessions, working through his recovered memories and confronting the person he'd become during those lost years. Some days were harder than others, but he remained committed to the process. One particularly cold December morning, he arrived at the shelter to find they were short-staffed during a winter weather advisory. Without hesitation, he spent 12 hours helping to bring in extra cots, distribute blankets, and ensure everyone had warm meals. "You didn't have to stay this long," the shelter director told him as they finally sat down, exhausted. "Yes, I did," Elijah replied simply. At New Horizons, Naomi threw herself into her work, finding healing in helping others rebuild their lives. She developed a mentorship program that paired successful program graduates with new participants, creating a support network that extended beyond the organization's walls. "You've brought something special here," Julia observed one evening, visiting Naomi at work. She watched as her daughter organized a workshop on financial literacy, the room full of women taking careful notes and asking questions. Naomi smiled, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the building's heating system. "These women remind me that everyone deserves a chance to start over." As December turned to January and winter tightened its grip on the city, both Elijah and Naomi continued their separate journeys of healing and growth. They hadn't spoken since that morning in his office, but their paths occasionally crossed in unexpected ways. Elijah's anonymous donations helped fund a new computer lab at New Horizons, though Naomi didn't know he was the source. And sometimes, when Naomi's client success stories appeared in the non-profit's newsletter, Elijah would read them multiple times, proud of the work she was doing, but respecting her need for space. The winter months passed slowly, marked by small victories and quiet progress. Elijah's volunteer work at the shelter became a constant in his life, while Naomi's program at New Horizons grew and flourished. Both found that healing came not in dramatic moments, but in the steady accumulation of better choices and renewed purpose. By early spring, when the first crocuses began pushing through the melting snow, both had changed in ways that went beyond their external circumstances. Their separate paths had led them to something genuine and hard-won. Elijah's commitment to change had deepened into true understanding, while Naomi's healing had brought her to a place of quiet strength and peace. The city continued its endless rhythm, and life moved forward day by day, choice by choice, each season bringing its own lessons in growth and grace. The early morning sun painted golden stripes across the worn wooden pews of Grace Community Church. Naomi Walker sat beside her mother Julia in their usual spot, 5 rows from the front, just as they had done every Sunday for the past 20 years. The familiar scent of old hymnals and fresh flowers filled the air as the congregation settled in for the morning service. "The worship team needs another voice this morning," Julia whispered, gently nudging her daughter's arm. "Sarah's out with the flu." Naomi shook her head, clutching her well-worn Bible closer. "Mom, I haven't sung in front of people since that night at the office," Julia finished softly, understanding in her eyes. "Maybe that's exactly why you should sing today." The sanctuary continued to fill as more church members arrived, their quiet conversations creating a gentle hum throughout the space. Sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, casting colourful shadows that danced across the aged hardwood floors. "I don't know." Naomi hesitated, fidgeting with the silver cross necklace she wore. The thought of standing before the congregation made her stomach twist into knots. Julia reached over and squeezed her daughter's hand. "Your voice is a gift, sweetheart. Don't let painful memories steal your joy in worship." As the worship leader approached the microphone, Julia gave Naomi one more encouraging look. After a moment's pause, Naomi stood, smoothing her navy blue dress, and made her way to join the worship team at the front. Unknown to both women, at that exact moment, Elijah Grant slipped quietly into the back pew of the church. He had learned about Grace Community Church through his volunteer work at the shelter, where several residents spoke highly of the congregation's outreach programs. His hands trembled slightly as he took a seat, feeling out of place in his simple grey sweater and dark slacks. The worship leader welcomed everyone and announced the first hymn. Naomi's heart pounded as she stepped up to the microphone, her eyes fixed on the lyrics projected on the screen above. The pianist began playing the opening notes of "Amazing Grace," the same hymn she had sung that night in the office when everything changed. Her voice, hesitant at first, grew stronger with each word. "Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me." The familiar melody filled the sanctuary, and Naomi felt the tension in her shoulders begin to ease as she lost herself in worship. In the back pew, Elijah's breath caught in his throat. The sound of her voice transported him back to that night in the darkened office hallway when the first cracks in his amnesia had appeared. But this time, instead of confusion and anger, the memories brought waves of profound grief and longing. As Naomi continued singing, her voice carried clearly through the church. "I once was lost, but now am found, was blind, but now I see." Tears began streaming down Elijah's face, unchecked and unashamed. The words struck him with their truth. He had been lost, blind to the pain he had caused, blind to the love he had forgotten. Several verses into the hymn, Naomi's gaze drifted across the congregation, taking in the familiar faces of her church family. But when her eyes reached the back pew, she froze for a fraction of a second, her voice wavering slightly before finding its strength again. There sat Elijah, his head bowed, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. The sight of him, broken and vulnerable in a place he would never have entered months ago, made her heart constrict with unexpected emotion. As the final verse approached, Naomi's voice grew softer, more intimate. "Through many dangers, toils, and snares, I have already come." The words took on new meaning as she sang them, reflecting the journey they had both travelled. The hymn drew to a close, and in that suspended moment between the final note and the congregation's movement, Elijah lifted his head. Their eyes met across the sanctuary, hers steady and searching, his red-rimmed but clear. In that silent exchange lay months of growth, pain and unspoken words. The weight of truth hung heavy in the air between them. How far they had come, how much had changed, and how much remained unresolved. Neither smiled nor looked away, acknowledging each other's presence with the quiet dignity of two people who had walked through fire and emerged transformed. The moment stretched, measured in heartbeats rather than seconds, as the morning sunlight continued to pour through the stained glass windows, bathing them both in its multicolored glow. After the final hymn faded and the congregation began to disperse, Elijah remained in his seat, watching as church members gathered around Naomi to praise her singing. He noticed how her smile, though gentle, didn't quite reach her eyes, a detail he would have missed during his months of cruelty. His hands gripped the back of the pew in front of him, fighting the urge to approach her. Julia stood protectively near her daughter, and when she happened to glance in his direction, her expression was neither warm nor cold, just watchful, Elijah nodded slightly in acknowledgement before quietly slipping out of the sanctuary. The morning sun felt harsh on his face as he walked to his car, the hymn still echoing in his mind. 4 days passed. Elijah sat at his desk in his home office, surrounded by crumpled papers and discarded drafts. The leather chair that once symbolized his power now felt too large, too empty. A simple notepad lay before him, and his pen hovered over the clean white page. "Dear Naomi," he wrote, then paused, closing his eyes against the weight of everything he needed to say. When he opened them again, the words finally began to flow. "I write this letter not to ask anything of you, but to give you what I should have offered long ago, the complete truth of my failures. Each morning I wake remembering another moment when I caused you pain, and I can no longer keep silent about any of them. That first day I saw you cleaning our office floor, I felt something I couldn't understand, a pull, a recognition that frightened me. Instead of examining that feeling, I lashed out. I belittled you in front of others. I made cruel jokes about your work, your presence, your very existence. Each of these actions was despicable, and they came from a place of deep cowardice within me. But these recent cruelties pale in comparison to my greater betrayal. When I awoke in that hospital 5 years ago, confused and angry, I allowed others to reshape my understanding of who I was. I let them erase you. Worse, when you tried to reach me through letters and visits, I refused to see you. My business partner Marcus showed me your letters, and I dismissed them as attempts at manipulation. I chose power over truth, comfort over courage. I remember now the promise I made to you under the cherry blossoms in Lincoln Park. I swore I would always stand between you and the world's cruelty. Instead, I became the very thing I promised to protect you from. I weaponized my privilege and position against the woman I had once asked to be my wife. Your dignity through all of this humbles me. Your faith shames my faithlessness. Your strength in continuing to work, to serve, to sing, it reveals the depths of my own weakness. I watched you endure my casual racism and deliberate humiliation without becoming bitter or seeking revenge. You remained true to yourself while I became a stranger to my own soul." Elijah paused, wiping his eyes before continuing. "I don't write these things to burden you with my guilt or to seek absolution. You owe me nothing. I write because you deserve to know that I see clearly now, both who I was and what I became. I see how I failed not just our love, but basic human decency. I see the countless small wounds I inflicted, the trust I shattered, the light I tried to dim. The man who proposed to you would be horrified by the man I became. I'm working to find my way back to being someone worthy of the name you once spoke with love, even if that path never leads back to you. With deepest regret and sincerest accountability, Elijah." He read the letter 3 times before sealing it in a simple white envelope. No company letterhead, no executive signature, just plain paper carrying the weight of truth. The next morning, Naomi found the envelope in her mailbox. She recognized his handwriting immediately, and her hands trembled slightly as she carried it inside. Settling into her favorite reading chair by the window, she took a deep breath before carefully opening the envelope. As she read, tears began to fall onto the paper, smudging some of the ink. Each word felt like a key, turning in a long locked door, releasing emotions she had carefully contained for years. When she finished, she sat quietly, holding the letter against her heart, letting herself feel everything she had pushed aside in the name of survival. Later that afternoon, Julia came by with a pot of her homemade soup, a mother's intuition telling her she was needed. She found Naomi still in the reading chair, the letter now resting in her lap. "He wrote to me, Mama," Naomi said softly, handing the letter to Julia. Julia settled onto the couch and read carefully, her expression thoughtful. When she finished, she folded the letter with reverence before returning it to her daughter. "What do you think?" Naomi asked, her voice uncertain. Julia was quiet for a moment, choosing her words with care. "I think this letter shows a man who has done the hard work of honest self-examination. He's not asking for anything. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, not even understanding. He's simply laying his truth at your feet and leaving you free to do with it what you will." "I keep thinking about seeing him in church," Naomi admitted. "How he just sat there, crying during the hymn. The Elijah I knew these past years would never have shown such vulnerability." Fear of vulnerability was what destroyed him before. Julia reminded her gently. But fear shouldn't guide your response now. Take time to pray, to listen to your heart. Don't let old hurts make your decisions, but don't ignore them either. Discernment isn't about forgetting the past, it's about seeing clearly in the present. Naomi nodded, running her fingers over the letter's creased pages. I think I'm ready to talk to him. Not about getting back together or even about forgiveness yet, just talk." "Then that's where you start," Julia said simply, reaching over to squeeze her daughter's hand. Later that evening, after Julia had gone home, Naomi sat at her small desk and wrote a brief note. "Thank you for your letter. I would be willing to meet for coffee this Saturday at 10 o'clock at Grace Cafe, if you're available." She paused, then added, "I appreciate your honesty. Naomi." Her hand was steady as she addressed the envelope, ready to take this small step forward. Not in fear, not in hope, but in truth. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Lincoln Park as Naomi walked along the winding path. She'd chosen this meeting place carefully, public enough to feel safe, but quiet enough for honest conversation. The autumn air carried the scent of fallen leaves and distant lake water, a gentle reminder of life's constant changes. She spotted Elijah sitting on a wooden bench near the rose garden, dressed simply in jeans and a grey sweater. So different from his usual corporate attire. He stood when he saw her approaching, his posture uncertain, hands tucked into his pockets. "Thank you for meeting me," he said softly as she reached the bench. Naomi nodded, settling onto the opposite end of the bench. A respectful distance stretched between them, filled with years of unspoken words. "I've been coming here often," Elijah began, his voice steady but humble. "To think, to pray sometimes, though I'm still learning how." He glanced at her briefly before looking out at the garden. "The quiet helps me hear myself more clearly, the real self I buried for so long." Naomi watched a pair of sparrows hop along the path, giving herself time to absorb his words. "What have you been hearing?" she asked finally. Elijah took a deep breath. "The truth about who I became after the accident, the way I let pain and fear turn me cruel, how I used power to keep people at a distance because I couldn't bear my own emptiness." He paused, running a hand through his hair. "My therapist helped me understand that losing my memories didn't just erase our past, it erased the better parts of myself, the parts you helped nurture." "And now?" Naomi's question was gentle but direct. "Now I'm doing the work," he replied, his voice growing stronger. "Real work, not just surface changes. I've been meeting weekly with a racial justice group at the community center, learning to listen without defensiveness. I'm working with a spiritual director to understand the faith I once shared with you. The company's new leadership is implementing all the diversity initiatives I should have championed years ago." He turned slightly to face her, though his eyes remained respectfully lowered. "But more than any program or policy, I'm learning to sit with my shame without letting it define me. To face the harm I caused without making excuses. To rebuild integrity not because it might win you back, but because it's right. Naomi felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes, but her voice remained clear. Those are good things, Elijah. Important things. They're just beginning steps. He acknowledged. I know I have years of work ahead of me. Years of proving that this change is real and lasting. He hesitated before continuing. I'm not asking for reconciliation, Naomi. I haven't earned that right. I'm only asking for the chance to demonstrate consistency over time, not as your former fiancé or even as your friend, but simply as a man trying to walk a better path. The honesty in his voice touched something deep in Naomi's heart, but she knew she needed to be equally honest. I appreciate your transparency, Elijah, and I see the genuine changes you're making, but I need to be very clear about my boundaries. She turned to face him fully, her expression gentle but firm. I can't offer emotional support for your journey. That wouldn't be healthy for either of us. I can't be your guide or your conscience. Those roles belong to your therapist, your spiritual director, and the community you're building. Elijah nodded, accepting her words without protest. What I can offer, she continued carefully, is openness to occasional intentional contact. Maybe meeting like this every few weeks in public places to share updates on our lives, but with the understanding that I'm not promising anything beyond those conversations. I understand completely, Elijah said quietly, and I respect those boundaries. Thank you for being willing to offer even this much. They sat in companionable silence for a few moments, watching the sun sink lower behind the trees. A cool breeze rustled the remaining roses, carrying the promise of evening. I should go, Naomi said finally, rising from the bench. Mama's expecting me for dinner. Elijah stood as well, maintaining the careful distance between them. How is Julia? A small smile touched Naomi's lips. Strong as ever, still teaching Sunday school and running the food pantry. She raised an extraordinary daughter, Elijah said softly, then quickly added, I'm sorry. I don't mean to overstep. It's all right, Naomi assured him. Thank you for meeting today, for being honest. Thank you for listening, he replied, for giving truth a chance to exist between us again. They walked together to the park entrance, their steps measured and unhurried. At the gate, they paused, both understanding this moment's significance, not an ending or a beginning, but a quiet point of change. Take care, Elijah, Naomi said simply. You too, Naomi. They parted ways as the first stars began appearing in the darkening sky. Naomi walked toward her car, feeling lighter somehow, not from false hope or easy answers, but from the peace that comes with truth acknowledged and boundaries respected. Behind her, Elijah stood watching until she drove away, his heart full of quiet gratitude for this small mercy of connection restored. Both had changed in ways that went beyond words, she in her strength to set loving limits, he in his willingness to honor them. And in that change lay the seeds of something real, whatever form it might eventually take. The autumn sun cast long shadows across the community center's parking lot as Naomi arrived for her regular volunteer shift at the food pantry. Her steps slowed when she spotted Elijah unloading boxes from his car, his suit replaced by worn jeans and a simple grey sweater. Julia appeared beside her daughter, laying a gentle hand on her arm. He's been coming every Tuesday and Thursday for the past month, she explained softly. Never asks for recognition. Just does what needs doing. Naomi watched as Elijah carefully stacked canned goods on shelves, taking direction from the elderly coordinator with humble attention. When he noticed them, he simply nodded in greeting and continued his work. Later, during the dinner service, Naomi observed how Elijah spoke with dignity to each person who came through the line, learning names, remembering details about families, offering genuine smiles that reached his eyes. "Your mother's been teaching me about food insecurity in our community," he told her during a quiet moment. "I had no idea how many children go hungry right here in our neighborhood. There's so much we don't see when we're wrapped up in our own worlds." Naomi replied carefully. "You're right," he acknowledged. "I'm learning that every day." Week 2. The following week brought them together at a racial reconciliation workshop hosted by Julia's church. Elijah sat quietly in the back, taking notes as speakers shared personal stories of discrimination and hope. During the small group discussion, Naomi watched as Elijah listened to a young black man describe being followed in stores. Instead of becoming defensive or offering solutions, Elijah simply said, "Thank you for trusting us with your experience. I'm here to learn." After the session, their eyes met across the room. No words were needed. They both understood the significance of this moment. Week 3. The third week found them at their first joint counseling session, arranged through their spiritual director. The office was warm and welcoming, with soft lighting and comfortable chairs arranged in a circle. "Why are you both here today?" the counselor asked. Elijah spoke first. "To understand how to rebuild trust in healthy ways, to learn what true repentance looks like in action, not just words." Naomi nodded. "To explore whether healing is possible while maintaining strong boundaries, to ensure any steps forward are genuine and sustainable." The session was challenging but productive. They discussed communication patterns, trigger points, and the importance of equal power dynamics in their interactions. Week 4. By the fourth week, they had settled into a rhythm of supervised interactions. They worked together at the food pantry on Tuesdays, attended workshop sessions on Thursdays, and participated in counseling every Saturday morning. During a community cleanup event, Naomi noticed how Elijah consistently deferred to others' leadership, especially people of color. He no longer commanded attention or dominated conversations. Instead, he asked questions, offered support, and stepped back when appropriate. "Your humility seems genuine now," she commented as they collected litter from a vacant lot. "It's getting easier to set aside pride," he replied thoughtfully. "When you stop trying to protect your ego, you can actually hear people's hearts." Week 5. The fifth week brought unexpected challenges. During a particularly intense counseling session, they addressed the power dynamics of their past workplace relationship. "I abused my position," Elijah admitted, his voice thick with emotion. "I used my authority to hurt someone I once promised to protect. That's not just personal failure, it's systemic racism in action." Naomi felt tears welling up, but spoke firmly. "Acknowledging that truth is important, but what matters more is how you use your privilege now to create change." Week 6. By the sixth week, their interactions had grown more natural, though boundaries remained clear and respected. They shared coffee after volunteer shifts, discussing books on racial justice and spiritual growth. Their conversations were honest but measured, each careful to maintain emotional safety. During a food pantry session, Julia observed them working together efficiently, communicating with brief glances and simple words. "You found a new rhythm," she commented to Naomi that evening. "We're learning to exist in the same space without past expectations." Naomi replied, "It's different now, more equal." Week 7. The seventh week brought a milestone moment during their counseling session. The therapist asked them to describe what they saw in each other now compared to 2 months ago. "I see someone who's doing the hard work of transformation," Naomi said carefully. "Not for me or for show, but because it's right. I see strength that was always there," Elijah responded. "But now I truly understand its worth and depth." Week 8. On a crisp Saturday morning, in their 8th week of rebuilding trust, Elijah and Naomi sat together on a bench outside the counseling office. Their session had ended early, leaving them in this unexpected moment of privacy. "These past 2 months have taught me so much," Elijah said quietly. "About myself, about true repentance, about the difference between remorse and real change." Naomi nodded, watching leaves dance across the sidewalk. "I've seen the change in you," she acknowledged. "It's consistent, genuine." Elijah turned slightly toward her, his expression earnest but calm. "Naomi, I'm not asking for marriage or even romance. Those bridges were burned by my actions, and I accept that. But I need to ask you something." She met his gaze steadily, waiting. "Do you believe new beginnings are possible?" he asked softly. "Not a continuation of what was, but something entirely new, something built on truth and equal footing." The autumn wind stirred around them, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and fresh possibilities as Naomi considered her answer. The autumn sun streamed through the stained glass windows of New Hope Community Church, casting warm patterns across the wooden pews. The small gathering had come together for their monthly community celebration, where members shared their testimonies of transformation and hope. Naomi stood at the podium, her professional attire reflecting her new role as Executive Director of the Walker Foundation for Women's Empowerment. The organization, which she had built from the ground up, now supported hundreds of marginalized women through job training, counseling, and leadership development. "This past year has taught us that change is possible." She addressed the congregation, her voice clear and confident. "When we stand together in truth and dignity, mountains can move." From his seat in the middle pew, Elijah watched with quiet pride. Gone was the controlling CEO who wielded power like a weapon. In his place sat a man transformed by humility and service. He now worked alongside Naomi at the foundation, offering his business expertise while carefully ensuring he remained a supporter rather than a director. Julia sat in her usual spot near the front, her Bible open on her lap. She had witnessed their journey with prayerful patience, watching as broken trust slowly mended through consistent actions and respected boundaries. When Naomi moved to the choir area, the congregation fell silent in anticipation. This particular hymn had become symbolic of their journey, the same song that had first stirred Elijah's buried memories in that dark office hallway so long ago. Her voice rose clear and strong, filling the sanctuary with words of grace and redemption. The melody wrapped around each person present, carrying the weight of their shared story, not just of romantic love restored, but of human dignity reclaimed and faith renewed. Elijah listened, remembering how far they had come. Their relationship had been rebuilt carefully, thoughtfully, with professional counseling and unwavering support from their community. They had faced hard truths about power, privilege, and the deep wounds of racism. Through it all, they had chosen the harder path of genuine transformation over quick forgiveness. As the final notes faded, Elijah rose and walked to where Naomi stood. He extended his hand, not as someone claiming ownership, but as an equal offering partnership. Naomi's fingers met his, their grasp firm and sure, speaking of mutual respect and hard-won understanding. Julia watched them from her seat, tears of gratitude sliding down her cheeks. She had prayed for this moment, not for a fairy tale ending, but for genuine healing. She saw before her two people who had done the difficult work of becoming better, who had learned to love with wisdom and walk in truth. They stood together, their joined hands a testament to what could be built from the ashes of what was lost. Their love story had become something more, a testimony to the power of genuine repentance, the strength of dignified forgiveness, and the transforming grace of God. The morning light continued to pour through the windows, illuminating their faces as they stood rooted in faith, dignity, and hard-won love. In that peaceful moment, hope bloomed anew, speaking not of perfect endings, but of restored humanity and the endless possibility of redemption. Thank you for being here. If something in this story stayed with you, I'd love to see you again. Subscribe, and tomorrow I'll bring you another story crafted with heart